So I'm going to start there actually with the title, Safety First, Learning Second. So I wrote a blog on this a couple of years ago, and it's now turned into the second chapter of my book that's coming out next year. And I sent the title to Graham last week, Safety First, Learning Second. And then I suddenly thought, gosh, in this kind of current experience that we're all having, you might think that I'm here to tell you how to keep safe from the virus in the classrooms and how to make that happen. That's not my area of expertise. So if that's what you came for, feel free to go and grab your brew, put the kettle on. That's not what I'm talking about. That's why I added the wellbeing bit, because really what I'm talking about here is us enabling staff, schools, the education world to prepare a really safe space for our young people so that they can learn. So I'm a behaviour and education specialist, and I work with students with social, emotional, mental health issues, emotional behavioural difficulties, children who've experienced extreme trauma, abuse, neglect, and more often than not, this comes out in challenging behaviour for the adults who educate these young people, and many of our young people have been excluded from mainstream schools. Now, any of you there who've worked with these type of young people before will know, if we don't get this bit in place, if we don't make the students feel safe and welcomed and included, your lesson plan goes out the window. And it's one of the reasons I love working with these types of kids, is because you really know when you've got it and you know when you haven't. So the best way to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here, this concept of safety first, learning second, is to give you some examples. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, I'm Adele Bates Z. We've got our insult of the week, which I absolutely love. People in my community join in and we share those wonderful insults that our young people give us. And here's an example. So I was working in a special school and I went to go and collect a young person. She's got autism, learning needs, behavioural needs, been excluded from other schools, etc. And the key point here was I wasn't the usual person, I wasn't a normal person to collect her. But we kind of thought it'd be okay. That person was away, I went down. So I went down to the car, the body language told it all to start with, just sitting there like this. I went up to the door and she wound the window down and she looked at me and said, "Why are you collecting me?" And so I tried to explain to her, "Laura, your key worker, she's not in today, but she's okay. She'll be back tomorrow. It's training." And I knew this student pretty well. I'd worked with her for 2 years. We had a really good working relationship, but still, it wasn't right. She was not impressed and she wasn't moving out the car. And so I did what I do when I don't know what to do, which is I asked the kids. So I said to her, "Okay, would you be able to let me know what's wrong with me being the one to pick you up today?" To which she looked me up and down and said, "Your face." Which, unfortunately, was not something I could change. It took me 20 minutes to get this young person to persuade her, 20 minutes plus an extra member of staff, to persuade her to come from the taxi into the school. Now, that sounds like quite a fun anecdote, which it kind of is. But underneath that, we've got themes that I feel are going to be absolutely necessary as we start bringing our students back into schools more and more, in different countries, in different ways, in different timescales, however that's happening. Because this young student, things had changed for her. Her usual routine had gone wrong. The normal people weren't in the normal place at the normal time. And I think, which is key to this, she had no control over that. Nobody had given her a heads up. No one told her, "Oh, it's going to be different tomorrow." We didn't know. And then she had this reaction. You can start to see there how those kind of themes of things not being normal, routines not being in place, can make us feel very uncomfortable. Now, of course, that was a particular student with very particular learning needs. Back into mainstream, we can see the same thing. So I used to have a year 11 class, GCSE, and I have no idea what this timing was, but we were doing a GCSE year 11 mock in the English classroom because the hall was full, and it was set for the period after the Christmas dinner. So as you can imagine, that's a bit of a a challenging bit in the first place. But so I got ready for this and I was thinking, right, okay, how on earth am I going to get them ready? I opened the door, the students were there, and it was exactly what I thought. I opened the door and coming towards me was Christmas frivolity, hyperness, wham. I shut the door again. I thought, I can't get them to their mock. They're high as a kite. Now, luckily, I was in a place where the office was just round the corner, so I popped my head in and I spoke to a colleague there, Mr. Fouracre. If you're watching, big hello. I said to Mr. Fouracre, what are we going to do? They're just high as a kite. How am I going to get them to do this mock exam right now? And Dave's response was, put on the clangers. Now, for those of you who might not know about the clangers, it's a children's TV programme from the 1970s, and they're kind of stuffed, like stuffed creatures, and they don't really speak. They kind of go bloop, 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 and they're in space, and they're very trippy. Please let me know if you remember the clangers. It was one of my mum's favourite programmes. Anyway, so this was Dave's solution to my hyper class needing to be ready for their mock, was to put on the clangers. I said, Dave, what are you talking about? How's that going to work? He said, it works with my toddler, it's fine. So I didn't have any better ideas right in that moment. Oh, hang on, Ed does a great impression of the clangers. Okay, we're going to have to see that later, Ed. So I went back in my classroom and I let the kids in, I put the clangers on, and I didn't say anything. I didn't explain anything because I thought I can't. I've just put it on. And they came in and they started very hyper, very excited. But as we went along, they started to calm down and started to get regulated by the soothingness of this children's 1970s programme. Whilst they were watching, I was really hoping my head of department didn't come in, because if she did, I'm not quite sure how I would have justified. Instead of doing the GCSE mock right now, we're watching the clangers. The only response I could have given them was, Dave told me to. Anyway, by the end, some of the students were about that far from putting their thumbs in their mouth. They had completely calmed down. And I had just put in front of them the mock papers, just on each of the desks. I hadn't said a word. And at the end of that 11 minutes of the clangers, all I had to say was, okay, you know it's your mock exam now. Open your papers. You have an hour and 10 minutes. And they did it. So what this magical clangers had done, it was help the students to regulate themselves ready for learning. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about safety and well-being. Sometimes it's very extreme, and sometimes it could just be little things like that. Now, those two examples are quite light and quite fun, but of course there is another side to this. I had a colleague once who was asked to work with a young girl who'd just come over from a different country. She didn't have much English, so he was set to do some intervention work. And you know, it's in those offices we often have, like next to the office, like an intervention room, just one-on-one. It's quite a small room. And my colleague spent about half an hour with this girl and couldn't get her to engage at all. Couldn't even get her to open a book, couldn't get her to speak, nothing. And he was really frustrated with himself, and he thought he'd done something wrong, and he was quite, annoyed, as you would be as a teacher. And it wasn't until afterwards that a colleague told him that this girl had actually been raped in her previous country by a man. And so, for her, being again in a room on her own with a man, guess what? She was concerned about her safety. She was not going to be learning about the past tense in English. Safety first, learning second. So these are the kind of examples that show us. I'm working with a colleague at the moment. She's written a blog for me recently, Kate McAllister. She does some great explorations around stress and toxic stress. And this idea that when we are in these heightened stressful moments, we cannot learn because we are in the fight, flight, freeze type mode. And we can't take that information in. We know that ourselves. I mean, hands up, definitely. I know recently I've been a lot more anxious than I usually am. And in that state, it is much, much harder to take on new information, new facts, or be asked to take risks in a way. Even just standing here feels a bit like a risk right now, to be honest. It's hard. And if we're going to expect our students to do that, we need to make it a safe environment for them to do that in the first place. So recently, I've been fortunate enough to be kind of a founding member of a collective, the Education Wellbeing Collective. And we are a group of teachers, head teachers and consultants who are supporting and championing the evolution of wellbeing in schools and their communities. Because wellbeing cannot be another list that we've got to tick off. In the meeting we had this week, actually, we were talking about how often that's what happens with wellbeing. It's another list to tick off, another pressure for head teachers and SLTs to make sure they manage. And it can't be that. Because if we get to the how part of the title of my talk, I believe that the how has to start with the adults. And the how has to start with us looking after ourselves. But before that, we've got to recognise that it's okay not to be okay. And that is for the head teachers and the SLT, and not just the staff and not just the pupils, because if we've got senior members of staff who are unable to hold that space after this global pandemic that we don't know how it's going to affect us yet mentally, then nothing is going to go into place. So we need to look after ourselves, and there's many, many tips and blogs and all sorts of things of how to do that. There's a few on my website, you can have a look on there, but I think there's another piece here. And I just want to read this. Knowing where the stress is, it went. There's a really good comment there. I wanted to include it, but thank you. Knowing where the stress and anxiety stems from is key to provision. Thank you. Yes, thank you for bringing that back. That must have been Graham doing a clever technical thing. Exactly. We need, as we go back into education and back into more perhaps formal learning, we need to know what's going on for our young people, and we need the time and space to do this. And here's the piece that kind of links in as well to what Jelma was saying. I'd quite like to dare you. And in fact, I'm going to double dare you, because I think this is really important. I think as an industry, as a profession, as education right now, we have an opportunity to really start communicating what we and our young people need. And there will be people who have no idea what it's like to be on the front line with our young people, who will be making decisions for us right now. And I believe that collectively we have an opportunity now to say to them, no, this is what needs to happen. We need that safety in place. We need that wellbeing in place. And quite wonderfully and challengingly, this is going to look different for everyone. It's going to look different for every teacher. It's going to look different for every pupil. But we need that time and space to do it. So my dare is to you to start communicating that. And actually, sometimes saying no. I know from yesterday that Liverpool in the UK has made a decision to not open schools despite the government's advice suggestion, for example. They're saying actually no. And if you really need a little bit more of permission to do this, I'd like to share a final insult of the week with you. So I was working with a pupil, and I was doing that thing that teachers find themselves doing, which is just useless. I don't know why we do it, but we do. And I was trying to help her, and I was trying to help her with her learning, as you do. And she just turned to me and she said, "Miss, please fuck off. I'm trying to learn." Which I think is a brilliant statement that we can keep inside of our heads when we're trying to communicate to those other people. We know what we're doing. We know what our young people need. We need space and time to get used to this new situation. Safety first. Learning second. Thank you.
Was there a swear in there, Adele?
No, definitely not.
Are you sure?
So, I haven't told you the title of my book either, have I?
Thank you.
You can bleep it out. You can bleep it out. I've got some free resources as well. Is it okay to talk about those, Graham?
Yeah, sure. We've got a Padlet running, so you can always whack them on there as well. For people.
I saw that. Can't work it out. Sorry. Not knowing my
give me the link. I'll put them on a Padlet.
Well, when it's finished eating, you can send it.
So over on my website, which is adelebateseducation.co.uk, there's 2 free video series. There's one for teachers and teaching assistants, teaching staff, and one for more of a school-wide perspective, leadership angle, and they're both about supporting the young people with behaviour that challenges the adults. So they're free and they're on there, so I'd like to share them. And then there's a last little thing I need to ask for, since this is the global route, Ed.
In
the future, I'm looking soon to be working perhaps in Bulgaria, and I'm looking for schools, teachers that I can connect with out in Bulgaria, because je n'entends mia bulgarka. So I might be over there at some point in the future. So please do look me up with Bulgarian people.
Oh, Adele, that wasn't swearing again, was it?
No, that was me saying my partner is Bulgarian. Okay. My girlfriend is Bulgarian.
Thank you so much. Do you know what, Adele? That resonates with me because what you've been saying. Because the school that I'm in, we've got a high percentage of AEN children, EHCPs. I think as a school, we are possibly the highest on the island now, including special schools. And we find, this is going to really impact on those children coming back into school. Yeah. They've been at home, they've had very little structure, and so it's going to be a difficult time for us, especially as we social distancing, we can't go hands on, and
I think as well what I've seen speaking to colleagues is this is something that the special schools are perhaps more used to, but I feel like it's going to be happening increasingly across mainstreams as well, because we don't know how these young people are going to be responding when they come back. We don't know what the young people or the staff have been experiencing whilst in lockdown. So I think something that was very much felt like a special schools thing, I think is going to much more increase into mainstream, and I think that's why this concept needs to really be accounted for as we plan our way back into schools.
I totally agree. Before you go, Ed is going to do the clangers impression.
Yes, great. This is for my mum. I think she's watching if she's worked out.
My nose flute.
Ready?
Are you ready?
Brilliant. Thank you, Ed.
That's the only reason I wanted just to do that.
Global Brew in Isolation, clangers. Thank you so much, Adele, for joining us. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.